share the slides with you. Yeah. Okay, I think there's someone that is unmuted. If you could check whether you're muted or not. Okay, so the next chapter we're going to talk about is about remittances and its impact on economic development. So remittances basically result from migration. Yeah. So first, we need to understand what is remittances exactly and how it is related to migration. So let's briefly talk about migration first, and then we will talk about the resulting remittances out of that. So international migration has attracted a lot of public interest over the last few years. Actually, there's always lots of talk about international migration, but actually also sometimes concerns about migration and their implications and so on. But it's interesting that actually it's only 3% of the world's population that are international migrants. So here, lots of talk about migration, but actually the percentage of the world's population is not that high at all. So according to the United Nations, the estimated number of international migrants worldwide in 2020 has been 281 million people. And that's not a lot if you consider how many billion peoples are there out there. So that's why percentage-wise, not such a big deal. So why do actually people migrate? For several reasons. And when people are asked why they migrate, it's definitely multiple reasons. Looking for better jobs, better living standards, safer countries, sometimes nicer weather, greater opportunities, and so on. If we look at, for example, differences in wages, differences in salaries, then statistics are actually showing that the wage level in the high income countries are often 5 times the wage level of the same kind of occupation in developing countries already, after adjusting for the fact that the different price levels are different in different countries, after adjusting for purchasing power. So already taking into account that there are different price levels between different countries, you often have a big difference in compensation, in payment between income in developing countries and developed countries. And this is, of course, often attracting many people for migration, but not just this, but also in addition to this, the better living standards that are often there in developing in developed countries, and the better institutions, better education, and so on. Yeah. But we need also to be careful, because often when people think about international migration, they have in mind the pattern: people migrate from developing countries to developed countries. And even when we look at the statistics there, it's not necessarily the case, because statistics show that actually only about 1/2 of all migrants that are leaving a developing country and migrating abroad, only half of them are going to a developed country, and the rest goes to another developing country. So there is lots of migration between developing countries, and this again reminds us of the fact that developing countries themselves are also so different from each other. So even if people are looking for better opportunities and better jobs and lives and safer community, and maybe lower crime rates and nicer weather and so on, this can also often happen between the developing countries. And we've already seen how there can be lots of variation already between the developing countries. So if you consider the difference between, for example, a low-income country and a upper middle income country, which is on the higher level of a developing country, so the two extremes of developing countries, sometimes the difference can already be bigger than the difference between a developing country that is already very well developed and a developed country. Yeah. So therefore, this is often a wrong perception, thinking of the flows only go from the direction from developing to developing countries, which only makes for maybe half of the international migration. Of course, sometimes things go the other way around. Huh? I mean, sometimes people from a developed countries decide to go and live in a developing countries, happens as well. Huh? Not so many high numbers, but this is also existing. Okay, now this implies, the implication of this human mobility definitely go beyond just the life of the migrants themselves. And this is what remittances basically here is about. Yeah. So literature says that migration has definitely substantial impact, not just on the people that decide to go and live in another country, not the migrants themselves, but, and this is what we're going to talk about here, it also has a lot of impact on their families back home, the left behind, if you want, the other part of the family that is still back in the country of origin, on the country of origin in general, yeah, but of course also on destination countries. So many, also if we speak about developed countries, nowadays many developed countries are also relying a lot on migration because there are certain jobs that cannot be fulfilled from the local people. We also know that some developed countries have shrinking population, which also lead to the fact that more migration is needed. Have also shortages of workers in certain sectors that are very necessary. So definitely, we can talk about the impact here at so many different levels. We're not going to talk about all of this here. I tell you which parts we're going to concentrate on. But this topic is such a big topic. I mean, you can talk about the impact on the life of the migrants. You can talk about the impact of the families of the migrants that is still in their home countries. You can talk about at the macro level, about the impact on the countries that they left, their countries of origin. Is there any impact on the countries of origin and its development progress? And you can also discuss what is the impact on the countries that receive them. And the fact that they receive migrants, basically, what kind of implications does this have on so many things, on economics, on institutions, on social dynamics, and everything. What we're going to talk about here are the remittances. And the remittances have a very specific are a very specific part of what I'm talking about here. Financial remittances basically mean the money that the international migrants are sending back home for whatever reasons. Yeah, so if someone sends money, travels, works in a different country, and sends money back home, these are the remittances. What are reasons why people would, if they work in a different country than their own, if they migrated to another country or just traveled to work in a different country for a few years, why would they send money back home? What are reasons for remittances? Delia?
Can you understand me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I think it's just to help families or friends back at home, because if you migrate, you usually get a higher wage, so it's easier to give some money to your family and help them out.
Okay. Can you think of other reasons as well? So let's collect from the others if it's another reason. So if you just want to say the same, you don't have to, but you don't need to. But can you think of additional reasons, Kuber?
I think another thing is if they are investing on something for their retirement, they'll be
Right.
sending
Could be
money.
for investment reasons. Maybe they don't even have any family left behind. Maybe they took their family with them and they not supporting any family at home, but they're still sending money back to their home countries because they're buying a house there for the future, or they are investing there. Maybe it's a combination of both. Some of it is sent home for investment reasons, and others is to support family back home. So it could be a combination of different reasons. One more raised hand, Nico?
Another reason might be that they pay back loans that they took in their home countries.
Right. So if they took a loan before, study loans or other kind of loans, and they still have to pay it back, so this would be something they still have to serve, and they would be sending money back home. Sometimes they just prefer to save money that they collect or that they earn in their home countries, so they are trying to look for investment opportunities there. Yeah, so there are different reasons for those financial remittances, and these financial remittances is what we're going to concentrate on in this chapter. So basically, do remittances as basically one flow, one financial flow between countries, and I'm going to show you how remittances are actually a major financial flows between countries. Do they actually affect economic development? And so when countries receive lots of remittances, could this boost its economic development? What are pros? What are cons? What are limitations? What are possibilities? And we're going to look at examples from different countries. Today, we'll start by looking at a lot of statistics about the topic and understand more about the dimension of remittances and its development in the recent years and so on. I'm going to give you a reading. It's simple to read. It's not a sophisticated academic paper, but it's a simple reading on remittances that I would like you to read for next time while thinking at the question of how do remittances affect economic development? Because this is the discussion we'll have next time. Don't bother a lot about the beginning of the reading when they talk about numbers, because I'm going to present to you here more updated numbers than they have in that reading. Okay, because it's not from just this year or something, but concentrate more on the argumentative side of the reading to prepare for having a discussion about the impact of remittances on economic development. The word, when people say remittances, they often have actually in mind the financial remittances. So often actually, you don't have to write financial remittances, just remittances, and people always think about those financial flows between countries. But in the social science literature, there is also the term social remittances. So what is this? Remittances can also have a social nature, and this actually started with the work of Livette in 1998, but it's still very much an under-researched topic. Yeah, so nowadays here there is, and also with this paper, if you're interested in that topic, a recent paper by, I'm not sure what the pronunciation, to Chio maybe, and Wahba, which was some sort of literature review for a handbook on that topic, because this topic is still in having lots of research on. And the idea here about social remittances is basically, well, financial remittances, as we said, means people traveled, work in a different country, send money back home. Social remittances would be, can they affect their home countries socially? So does the home country get affected by new ideas or different kind of behavior, ideologies, identities, social capital, and so on? Can you think of how this could happen? What are channels through which this could actually happen? Kabir?
I think I heard this from my public diplomacy class, but like when international student goes to another country and they get education and stuff and go back, the way they learn or the way they adapt culture, they enforce that into, or like they affect or impact the country when they go back, their origin country, because of how they adapt or something. So
Right.
maybe like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, going to study in another country or going to work in another country, it can affect people's mindsets. It can affect people's thinking. It can affect how people reflect about things. It can affect about can affect people's openness. Maybe people become more open, more tolerant to differences between people, between ethnicities, different ideologies, cultures, religions. any kind of impact that can have on them. Can this impact affect their home countries? This would be the social remittance, if they have effect. So if they go back, maybe that has an influence. If they get family members to visit them and they see the difference and they experience the different culture or the different living standard, or they see different kind of ideology, different kind of political system, yeah, so it can have also impact on so many things. Some people just traveling for the first time basically makes them think about, oh, it's not like the whole world is like it is back home, but there are so many differences across the world. Maybe it sounds, for you as people that are more global, sounds very naive statement, but maybe for people that never left their own country, it's not that much. So this is the idea here of social remittances. And as you can see, it's much more difficult to measure. And this is why the research took some time here, originating from sociologists, but then actually with economists getting on track and trying to also identify and quantify the social remittances effect. It's not very easy, because you need to identify those channels through which the effect can happen and be able to really measure them, which is not very easy. So they look, for example, at situations where you had maybe whole villages where there were lots of returnees from other countries that were living abroad. And see, did this affect that kind of village? Did this affect the community? Is this community maybe more, depending on what they want to measure? I mean, economic effect, they measure, did it have any economic impact? If they want to measure the ideology, is it more progressive? Does it maybe behave differently in elections? Does it have a different stance towards education? This would be possibilities to measures. There are some countries, also culture, that got affected by social remittances. Let me give you, for example, an example from Egypt that, as I told you, know more about. And in the 70s, it started a wave of many people from Egypt going to work in Gulf countries. And this is a big number of people, millions of people. Many went to Saudi Arabia in the 70s, in the 80s, and the 90s, and still happening, especially Saudi Arabia is a big country, but also other Gulf countries, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar, and so on. Especially with the big flow of people that went to Saudi Arabia and being also making better money there. So having also an economic stance in their family, when they go back, they are more wealthy, they can afford to offer things for their families and so on. So that's an economic side. But there was also an ideological impact. So they were returning also with maybe different patterns of religion than was common in Egypt. Here, Muslim people in Egypt, Muslim people in Saudi Arabia, similar, but maybe different opinions on religion, different ideology, different interpretations. So there started to be maybe more different kind of interpretations of religion, more conservative interpretation of religion, and social impacts. Different way of how women are dressed in the country, different impact on gender roles and so on. So certain social aspects, cultural aspects, ideological aspects were transferred by those migrants when they returned, or sometimes actually just during vacations when they're visiting. And this often comes already when there is also a differences in the living standards, when those migrants manage to have also some economic powers in their families because they're making better money. They often also have they have more to say in the family. They can also affect life, not just of children, but also of siblings, of parents, of cousins. When they go back to rural areas and in the village, they have more to say because they have a larger stance and so on. So this can also have an impact on mindsets. Maybe if we think of Korea, how far did maybe waves of Korean Americans coming back to Korea have maybe an impact on the Korean society? So you can ask yourself that question if you're familiar, if you're Korean or you're living here and you're familiar with it. This would be social remittances. So I'm not talking about money that is sent back home, but I'm talking more about people coming and visiting their original home, or maybe returning to live there at some point, or any channels of communication in general that is happening. It can be just because of visits or because of phone calls or because of video conferences. And we spoke, if you remember before, about how nowadays exchange between people of different countries is much more easier than it used to be before. So some decades ago, it was either you have to visit or it's very costly to speak on the phone. You can write a letter, but that's pretty much it. Maybe make a recording and send it. But nowadays, you can chat online, video conference for hours. You can make videos and send them by the second. There is more exposure going on. So this is another branch of literature. And as I said, we won't have the time to talk a lot about this here. This is definitely a big impact of social globalization as well. But if you're specifically interested in that topic, you can also check this recent paper here. And as I told you, the empirical evidence on this is actually still very ongoing, because it's not very easy to measure this as with financial remittances. Can you think of another example of that kind of social remittances, maybe from your countries of origin or anything, just to make sure that the idea came through? Sumin?
I heard that POSCO are the result of exchange the techniques of Japanese steel company. So I think the technical things, the knowledge is also kinds of social remittances between the Japan and Korea in the 70s, I guess.
So are you talking about the company POSCO?
Yes.
Okay, so what is it? I wasn't aware that it has anything to do with Japan, to be honest. So can you say that again?
I learned about I read about articles that said the Japanese government and the Japanese steel company provides some knowledge and provides some capitals to construct a POSCO.
Okay, but maybe was it more in form of an international company?
Yes,
This is actually more maybe FDI?
Yeah, but the employees are going abroad to go to Japan and learn about their knowledge.
Okay. So Koreans go to the Japan, work there for some time,
Yeah,
or
to
take
learn
courses or
how to
something.
make a steel. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
How to make a